Banana.
कितना चार्ज है इस बेड में?
Good evening, everybody. We'll start our program in next 3 minutes from now. We are waiting for some more members to join. In next 3 to 4 minutes, we'll start the meeting. We welcome all of you. This program is also on live in YouTube on the link which is posted in the Sabha platform. So anybody, if you want to, any Sabha member, you can circulate the link to respective groups so that we can, many people from the audience also can join through YouTube. Thank you for a great discipline today. All microphones are mute. I am pleased to, I mean, this is very good discipline. I'll request everybody to mute their microphone and please unmute while speaking only. The mode of this event will be in English only. The communication mode will be purely in English, taking a variety of audience from multiple disciplines. I think we are already set for 54 members online with many members on YouTube also live. Good evening, Honorable High Commission, Mr. Abhay Thakurji. Thanks for joining, sir. I'll also request our admin and Sabha coordinator, Mr. Praveen, to mute if anybody by mistake on mute, so that there will be less disturbance. So thank you. Thanks for, I'll be moderating the program today for this event. Good evening, Honorable High Commissioner to India, Mr. Abhay Thakur, Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Surendran, and other Indian High Commissioner team, distinguished Sabha dignitaries, chief guest speakers of the evening, Dr. Doin Salami, fellow Sabha members, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's webinar. In this time of uncertainty and challenging time, where we all looking for credible information and appropriate guidance, it is important that we reach out time list of highly valued persons who can help us to achieve our personal and professional balanced lives. While Sabha has organized many webinars on health side by inviting leaders, doctors from health industries, it was extremely important that we have some people from economic backgrounds also to guide us what to do in this COVID time. We are pleased to have, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to have highly respected, profound speakers, renowned economist, consultant, and a senior fellow and associate professors and full-time member of Lagos Business School, Mr. Adedoyin Rasek Salami, the Chairman, Economic Advisory Council of Nigeria, Federal Government of Nigeria. I'm personally privileged to be a student of such great teacher during my MBA at Lagos Business School, and I'm very much thankful for his all valuable lectures. In short time, Mr. Praveen Kumar, the Sabha coordinator, will give a full introduction of these great speakers. While in the meantime, I welcome and invite Mr. Ramesh Biswal, the Sabha coordinator, to give the welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anand ji. And wonderful and nice rainy evening to all of us. Sabha welcomes all participants in this People's Awareness webinar of COVID, which is the 12th webinar for Sabha as of today. On behalf of Sabha, let me welcome His Excellency, the High Commission of India to Nigeria, Sri Abhay Thakurji, and also all the Indian High Commission officials of Abuja and Lagos, including the Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Surendranji, and also the First Secretary, Mr. Rachit Rawatji. You are welcome, sir, to this event, to the Sabha's platform. Sabha welcomes its in-house members. You must be knowing in-house members means all Samajam presidents and its other members, organizational heads. So those are Assamese Samaj, Bhojpuri Samaj, Bangiya Parishad, Telugu Samaj, Tamil Samaj, Kerala Samaj, Maharashtra Samaj, Sane Punjab, Sindhi Samaj, Tolukota Samaj, Jain Samaj, Rajasthani Samaj, Indian Muslim Association, UBAS, and also there are some other organizations like Rotary Club of Lagos Island, Rotary Club of Lagos Palm Group Estates, Afro-Asian organizations, Soro Yatra, Art of Livings. There are so many other organizations of Indian origin. All are the members of the Sabha, and their members and presidents, they are all welcome to these webinar sessions. Sabha also welcomes its mentors, Mr. Sri Siva Subramaniam, Chief Anil Gopwani ji, Sri Dinesh Rathi ji to this platform today evening. Sabha also welcomes the President of Indian Cultural Association, Chief Sanjay Jain, and its executive members and all the members of ICA to this platform. The President of IPF, Mr. Atul Khetri, along with the executive committee members and all IPF members are welcome to this platform, sir. Sabha also welcomes IWA President, Mrs. Gitika Tandon, and all its members to this platform. As you know, the captains of industry and all the company corporate houses in Nigeria are welcome to this platform, sirs. Sabha also welcomes all the Indian community members and all visitors, guests, and participants. Lastly but not least, Sabha welcomes Dr. Doin Salami, who has given his time for this evening and for which we are all together. So I am welcoming Dr. Doin Salami to this webinar session, who will be the guest speaker. Sabha also welcomes everybody to be patient and hear him nicely in this COVID-19 situation so that we can take good decisions, economics of mainframe of everything. So let's everybody listen to Dr. Doin Salami. So lastly, Sabha welcomes one and all for this people's webinar to listen from Dr. Doin Salami. Thank you. Over to Anandji.
Thank you, Mr. Vishal. Now I request His Excellency, our Indian High Commissioner, Sri Abhay Thakurji, to give an opening remarks on the event. Sri Abhay Thakurji.
Please unmute your mic, sir.
Kindly unmute, sir. Thank you, sir.
Well, a very good evening to everyone. Shri Anant, thank you for inviting me. At the outset, let me start by recognizing all the Indian community organizations which have been, which have joined us today evening. Ramesh Niswalji, thank you for putting this together. Yet again, a very good initiative with a very distinguished Nigerian speaker. It's a great honor for me to once again share the platform with Professor Dr. Doin Salami. And by now I can say he's a good friend because I remember my first address courtesy the Indian Professionals Forum in Lagos, where I had joined the same platform at which he had spoken, and I had benefited from his views as in his promoted and even more important capacity as the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council constituted by the President of Nigeria. It's an honor that Professor Salami has joined me and the entire Indian business community today evening. Thank you, Excellency, for joining us. I personally look forward to hearing you, very, very carefully. Once again, the President of the IPF, the President of ICA, all the heads of the Samajams, let me thank you for constant support and engagement and putting together a number of initiatives that bring Nigeria and India together, and also for the welfare of both communities on a regular basis. A few points I would like to make in my remarks before handing over to Professor Salami. We have, I would begin by really recognizing the tremendous contribution that Indian businesses have made to Nigeria's efforts to even during these challenging times of COVID-19. All the Indian companies big and small, whether they are in manufacturing or services or whichever sector they are, they have been very conscious of the needs of Nigeria and generously joined efforts. I would not name too many names, but all the big companies. We have Dinesh from Tolaram here, Stallion, all the other Airtel, all the big companies and smaller businesses have also contributed wholeheartedly. So I congratulate them and once again thank them for this effort. Many of the Indian businesses whom I have met have said that they have made sure not to lay off a single Nigerian employee, and even during this very challenging time. And I believe and I hope that it remains true, and that we recognize each other's needs in these times and stand by each other. I would, the second point I would want to make, which may be of interest to everyone, I was looking recently at the trade figures between India and Nigeria, bilateral trade figures, and I'm very happy to report that in the last financial year, which included 1.5 months of the COVID-19 pandemic period from April 1st to 30th March 2019-20. India's exports have grown from $3 billion to $3.6 billion. And this is something which tells me, a story, because despite the challenges, despite the difficulties that have been there in exchanges, we are seeing growing engagement between both countries. And despite the fall in crude oil prices, the Nigerian exports to India have stayed even during the financial year 2019-20 compared to the financial year 2018-19, where at about $10.2 billion. And I'm very happy to see that there is some modicum of stability coming back in the oil prices, and Nigeria's important key exports kind of remains all said and done on track and will come back as economies revive. So what I'm saying is, at a time when everywhere we are talking of decline by 5%, 10%, 20%, GDP suffering and whatnot. Look at the India-Nigeria story; it stands out. By a net growth in our bilateral trade in the year 1920. Of course, 2021 starting from April also needs to be seen, but this is a very important development, I would say. Also that I think some of the measures that we adopted over the last year, particularly in terms of liberalization of certain liberalization to the extent the High Commission could do of business visas and other visas, where we got the power restored to the High Commission to issue visas. This has been, I think, a very good step that has added momentum to our bilateral exchanges. We have seen a significant increase in education institutions, the number of Nigerian students who want to travel to India, and of course the tried and tested medical tourism and other business exchanges that have been there. So the trajectory, despite these times, does look to me quite full of promise. And once again, I would repeat, last time when Professor Doan Salami and I had spoken in the IPF platform, we had talked about direct flights, and Airpeace has moved very, very close. They have got the political clearance, and they are now in the process of getting a procedural security clearance for operating. And what has happened is both Air India and Air Peace are now seeing that the huge feasibility and viability, commercial viability of the India-Nigeria direct flight sector. And I would say that this is one of the important things we should not forget. And hopefully, once the international flights can be restored and some normalcy is returning, we would sooner than later hope to see an Air Peace direct flight. And they are definitely interested. They're extremely interested. It has not been a paper exercise for quite some time. And we hope this can actually be formally started in the coming months. The other thing I would say that probably, we always had a challenge of Indian companies at times not being able to find time, sufficient time, at least from my perspective, for Africa. And this was a complaint I used to hear from a lot of our businesses here, that we do need to get more Indian companies to engage with Africa and with Nigeria. And quite interestingly, what has happened over the last few months is we are seeing more and more DVCs, more and more exchanges online. New methods are coming, which are actually, probably a little ironically bringing Nigeria and India even closer together than probably in the pre-pandemic period. And this is another of the takeaways. I've had conferences with NASSCOM, with PhD CCI, which was attended by the president of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce. CII is coming up with several e-exhibitions. We have just recently tweeted the e-exhibition platform of the FIEO, the Federation of Indian Exporters Organization. And all of this is not talking about pharmacy, pharmaceutical sector, where India has, emerged in some ways the pharmacy of the world. And I would recognize particularly IPMIN and their role in it. And I can see Chairman, the head of IPMIN, Chief Varghese, amidst us. So it's a very good, progress despite the challenges that we are facing. Of course, we need to keep up with this engagement. There has been much discussion on how we can keep our two countries closer together, and really changing the method of doing business. IT, of course, e-health, all the IT products which are relevant for any large developing country like India can also be utilized and offered to Nigeria, and this is the way forward. We are also in regular talks with Nigeria on some of the major G2G projects. Let us see if some of them can now fructify, now that there have been some changes in the economic paradigm and of security of supplies. So we'll have to revisit some of these aspects related to international development assistance. And I think India will be able to come in, probably even more strongly than in the past. Or much of it will be spoken about by Professor Edwin Salami in his capacity as the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council. We look forward to hearing him. But I would end by saying that, this pandemic has shown that India and Nigeria need each other even more. And will have to invest and will have to work together even more to sustain their own growth and their own, utilize their own opportunities. One of the, symptoms, I would say, or the symbols, I would say, not only have we had 2,900 odd Indians who have returned from Nigeria to India, we are already seeing a number of Indians coming back from India to Nigeria for business purposes. In the flight which is arriving tonight, we are expecting about 65, 70 Indian SIRPAC holders coming back to Nigeria. We are going to see another certain number of Indian nationals involved in projects and businesses returning to Nigeria in the next flight, probably on the 8th of July. So I'm saying that And this is when this was seen by the authorities in Delhi, they were quite surprised that people want to now go back to their business and not only one-way traffic. And this tells us yet again something. So I think I would end by saying that we have good prospects. We need to stay closely engaged, keep talking to each other. We will continue to facilitate in some time emergency or even regular business visas. Keep up the interactions. And I thank you on behalf of the High Commission for inviting me for this very important interaction. And once again, thank Professor Salami for giving his very valuable time, and look forward to listening to him and his insight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I know you are extremely busy, and it is always inspiring, and informative speech always we hear to you a lot. And thanks for your time. Particularly, it is interesting to see that a lot of things are happening within India and Nigeria, even during this difficult time. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the information. I'll request our Sabha coordinator, Mr. Praveen Kumar, to introduce our guest speaker of the evening, Dr. Doyen Salami. Sri Praveen Kumar ji.
Good evening all. Sir, it is my distinct honor to introduce you our esteemed guest of honor and speaker of today's webinar. This day will be noted to be one of those rare and wonderful moments because of our invited guest, Dr. Adedoyin Salami. His name echoes the essence of his contribution to the country's economy, dynamism, dedication, compassion, teacher, and consultant. Dr. Adedoyin Salami is a doctoral graduate in economy of Queen's Mary College, University of London. He is currently the MD, CEO, Canos S Consulting, which he co-founded in 2014. In addition, he is a lecturer at the Lagos Business School, where has taught for over 2 decades. He was until the end of 2017 a 2-term member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria. He has equally served on the IMF's Advisory Committee of Sub-Saharan Africa. Presently, he is the chairman of the Board of Directors of both Prestige Assurance PLC and ARM Investment Managers. He is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG. Dr. Salami is the Managing Director and CEO of Canos Edge Consulting Limited, a bouquet management consulting firm based in Lagos. We are grateful, sir, for your presence among us today through this webinar. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming and inviting Dr. Adedoyin Salami to address us on the topic. Dr. Salami, thank you very much, sir. Please welcome.
A very good evening to you.
Yeah.
A very good evening to you, and thank you very much. Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to see you again. It's actually quite interesting that one of the distinct advantages, if one can say so, or one of the distinct positives to be taken out of COVID-19 is the fact that if this were in the pre-COVID period, we would all have been struggling to gather in one place. But today, we can all meet, everybody sitting comfortably wherever they find most convenient. And I think, in other words, it's not all doom and gloom. But Your Excellency and Your Excellency, the Deputy High Commissioner, it's a pleasure to meet with you. I know I still owe you because I did promise at our last meeting that I would come and physically pay you a visit. I will do my best to make good on my promise. May I also, before I begin to address the issues that I have been asked to speak to tonight, thank the Indian community in Nigeria. I have a funny feeling that soon enough I will have to apply for dual Nigeria-Indian citizenship. As I'm sure you all know, I have the distinct honor of leading the board of Prestige Assurance. And I must thank the Indian community for the support that they have given to Prestige and continue to give to Prestige. And I think, especially in the current set of circumstances, I really must thank the Indian community, especially Chief Anil Gruver. I'm not sure if he's on this call tonight, but I personalize it in that way simply because a very senior Nigerian staff of Prestige got into some medical emergency in the course of the past few days, but for the intervention of our networks in the Indian community, we probably, more likely than not, would have lost him. And so I really, on behalf of my colleagues and the Prestige family, I really do extend very, very warm thanks to the Indian community of professionals and the entire Indian community in Nigeria. We really are very, very grateful indeed.
And you are welcome, Dr. Salami. It was our duty. You are welcome, Dr. Salami. It was our duty.
Thank you very much. Tonight, I have been asked to speak about the impact of COVID-19 on the Nigerian economy and also to discuss the emerging imperatives for business. These are two, distinct issues, but they're linked because how business responds depends on how business understands what is happening and how quickly it responds. I do have a presentation. I will share my screen in a minute. And I do say now that a copy of the presentation will be forwarded probably on Tuesday for circulation to all your members. And so let me share my screen. Oh, sorry. Is it possible to have screen sharing enabled? I understand it.
Mr. Praveen, could you please give Dr. Salami the host title?
If it's not possible, it's not a problem.
Yeah, no, sir, you can do it now. Thank you.
All right.
No, I have given you the right.
Okay. Right. Okay. Can I assume that everybody can see my screen? Sorry,
yes, sir.
I've suffered a power cut, but we'll continue. They will restore power. We will switch to domestic power in a minute or two. So but I'll continue. In the
Prof,
meantime.
you can continue. We can see your screen, Prof. You can.
No, that's fine. So we'll continue. Right. This, as those of you who are my regular listeners will recognize this way in which I have described, what drives the Nigerian economy. And what is very important this time is that global conditions have worsened. And because global conditions are an important imperative as far as Nigeria is concerned, then you can immediately understand that that there is trouble ahead. And I think a couple of things to please note here. Not least of which, we have already seen oil prices go down, but we have already also seen those prices recover. Sometime in April, oil prices were negative, which essentially means that sometime in April, those who had bought oil were paying those who are supposed to supply it to, were paying them to keep it. They were paying them to keep it. And so to that extent, we had seen negative oil prices for the first time in a very, very, I can't actually recall when last oil prices were negative. The other key headache that a country like Nigeria faces is the flight of capital to safety. What we have seen from emerging markets generally, emerging and frontier markets generally, is a flight of capital back to advanced markets. And that has worsened. The third major dimension through which global conditions are affecting a country like Nigeria is through diaspora transfers. Because bear in mind that the Nigerian diaspora will suffer as in many countries unemployment rises. And so to that extent, we are finding that there are a number of the international dimensions of global conditions that are worsening as far as Nigeria is concerned. Now, let me then quickly move along. Now, in terms of globally, we are looking currently at about 11 million infections around the world. But let me quickly put one thing on the table now, right at the outset. All companies, and let us be very clear about this, all companies must have at least 2 scenarios in terms of the health dimensions. Let me quickly show you something. I will come back to some of these in a minute, but let me just quickly show you something. Now, if you look on my screen, what you see is that COVID-19 started essentially as a health crisis. It has now snowballed into an economic crisis. In many parts of the world, that economic crisis has become, in addition to an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis. And then in many parts of the world, it is adversely also affecting security. So no matter how you want to look at COVID-19, you need to bear in mind as a company in these 4 dimensions. So there's a health crisis, and you must ask yourself, not only as far as you're concerned personally and your families, but also those with whom you work, your staff, and those who your other counterparties are. And as I said, there's an economic dimension to this, but there's also a humanitarian dimension, because many countries, especially countries like ours, where the fiscal space has become constrained, we are now finding that we are struggling to meet the humanitarian dimensions of some of these things. Everybody is looking and we say, oh, in the UK, the government introduced a furlough program where they paid the salaries of people. But even there, you're beginning to find that that comes to an end. I think the latest is going to be in October. And so there is going to be a rise in unemployment. And I'm grateful to, to have heard His Excellency, the Ambassador, say Indian companies in Nigeria have not needed to let go or, to let go of their staff. But for me, these are the 4 key dimensions around which all companies are going to have: a health crisis, an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis, and finally, potentially a security challenge. So that's the first thing. And so what I am putting on the table right at this outset, Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is that we need, as far as corporate responses are concerned, we need to have 2 scenarios at the very least. One scenario which says COVID-19 will be managed by way of the introduction of a vaccine. In other words, we will get a successful vaccine that will enable us to restore the kinds of physical contacts that currently we are advised against. As I look at this, at some of my friends on this call, many of us are now at that age where we are indeed advised that it is in our own best interest not to go out, that we should shield ourselves. We are told that once you are 55 years old and above, it is in your best interest to shield yourselves. And so to that extent, the kinds of physical contacts that we're used to, I can't remember the last time I shook hands with anybody, at least not in the last 4 months or thereabout. And so it's constricting of human contact. So if a vaccine is successfully applied globally, then it means some of our usual ways of interacting can be restored. But please, as you look at your corporate responses, also build a scenario which says we are going to live with COVID-19. Let me make that, and I say this with some emphasis, that we are going to live with COVID-19. Now, whilst COVID-19 belongs to the family of coronaviruses, in which, by the way, the flu, the common flu, also derives. The difference between the flu and coronavirus, and COVID-19 as we currently know it, is that COVID-19 is infectious, the flu is not infectious. But don't forget, the flu mutates and changes its dimensions very, very consistently, which is why the flu remains with us. But because it's not infectious, it's not been a problem. And so as far as corporate responses are concerned, 11 million infections so far. And before anybody says, oh, perhaps we are seeing a second spike, a second wave. No, we are not. What has not happened is we have not successfully dealt with the first wave. So it's not as if, oh, it had gone down and we are coming to a new wave. No, it is that we are still dealing with the original challenges that we have. It caught the whole world unprepared, and so we really have to deal with it. And so companies really have to bear that in mind. Now, that said, globally, we have seen oil prices come down, even though it has now recovered, but it is still about 40% down on where it was at the beginning of the year. Don't forget, in January, oil prices, as far as Nigeria was concerned, Bonny Light was about $70 a barrel. Currently, we are seeing unemployment rise in many places. One of the other issues that we are seeing globally is countries are beginning to reflect a bit more deeply on the impact of globalization, especially a concentration of global production capacity in some of the more basic needs in China. And so to a certain extent, countries like ours, even if we are still trying to, gather our thoughts around, so what do we do? And as I'm sure you have now seen, the Economic Sustainability Plan provides a handle on Nigeria's response to COVID-19. But what is going to be important going forward? I'm not saying globalization will be seriously dented, but I think there will be a move by many countries to at least ensure that the basic things that they need kind of they have the productive capacity to do them. So what are we seeing? Commodity prices down, unemployment up, even global liquidity and certainly GDP growth across the major countries are severely down. The good thing though is this. If you look at the numbers as they currently are available, we are expecting a V-shaped recession. In other words, a very sharp decline followed by a recovery in 2021. So 2020 is going to be a very, very sharp decline. However, by 2021, the IMF and some of the other agencies see a recovery in the world economy. Now, having said that okay, we should now very quickly take a look at where we are domestically, and where we are domestically is not that difficult to remember. One of the things that we are told right at the beginning of this pandemic is that human beings who have an underlying condition were more susceptible to, shall we say, difficult outcomes in trying to manage COVID-19, and exactly the same thing for economies. And as you know, before COVID-19 hit, Nigeria was in the process of recovery from a prior recession, a recession in 2016, which we came out of in 2017, and we were gingerly recovering 2018 and 2019. Unfortunately, the underlying challenges are now compounded by COVID-19. So that being the case, on the health side, we are seeing, increasing cases. And sorry, whether we like it or not, as testing becomes more widespread, we will see higher numbers for Nigeria. What we are all hopeful of is that the fatalities have not been as bad as perhaps we, at least according to the official numbers, and we are hoping that those fatalities remain moderate. Now, but the challenges around COVID-19, slow growth. Now, let me quickly say this before I start talking about, what COVID-19 may or may not mean. Please recall, there are, in any economy, it doesn't matter how sophisticated it is. If you're going to break it down, it comes down to 4 major things. Any economy in the world, from the United States through the Indian economy to Nigeria to whoever you're thinking about. There are households, there are governments, there are firms, and there are markets. Those are the 4 key things that comprise any economy in the world. Households, in other words, consumers; firms, which are the basis of production; governments; and markets, which is where interaction happens. So it's in that kind of context that we are going to try and place, where we were. Growth was slow, consumers were under pressure, costs. Companies were already hemorrhaging profits anyway, and inflation was still high, and in particular, food inflation, okay? So that is kind of where we started from. Now, COVID-19 has come. As part Nigeria, like in other parts of the world, in order to contain COVID-19, there was a lockdown. Now we are like, and it looks like around the world, the second round of management will be, rather than general lockdowns, but will be area-specific, jurisdiction-specific lockdowns. And the reason is not very difficult to understand. The choice between keeping people alive and keeping economies working, there's an overlap. And so to a certain extent, and it's no use saying that, life is more important than economy. I'm afraid that, the view also has to be understood that especially in countries like ours, where the fiscal space is very narrow, but more importantly, where a lot of the labor force earns their income every day. In Lagos, for example, we did a survey in my firm in 2018. This was way before COVID. And 62% of the labor force of Lagos's population, of households in Lagos, irrespective of their socioeconomic classification, earned their income every day, 62%. So you can imagine, if you had prolonged lockdowns, then it would actually very adversely create a problem. Now, the Bureau of Statistics has undertook a survey in 2020, May 2020, roughly 5-6 weeks ago. And they found as follows, that 92% of the households that they surveyed saw COVID-19 as a threat to their family finances. Secondly, 42% of the respondents had suffered job losses. Beyond that, 79% of households reported a loss of income since March 2019. And this is for me very important, because when I said health into economy, into humanitarian, into security, 35 to 59% of households struggle to purchase staple food items. And you can immediately see a humanitarian dimension to this. And again, it's one of the things I will come back to, because companies must understand that you have 2 licenses. There is a legal license. The moment you register your business, it has a memorandum of, articles of incorporation and all of that, then you have a legal license. You may need regulatory license depending on which sector. However, all companies must also earn a social license to operate. And the social license to operate is by understanding a stakeholder view, and in terms of your community, trying to do the best you can to look after them. However, please look, the most widely reported shock by households was an increase in major food items faced by 85% of households since the outbreak of COVID-19, compared to only 19% between January 2017 and January 2019. So you can see that if nothing else, a couple of things are already clear from here. I already spoke about oil, but if you look at the domestic economy, a couple of things are already clear. The lockdown, indeed, one of the things we saw from the data that's available on the lockdown is human movement in areas that were commercial and industrial went down, whereas human movement in residential areas went up. So essentially, it simply confirms that people stayed at home during the lockdown. So what we are therefore immediately expecting is the lockdown, rise in unemployment, a fall in output simply because factories and production centers were shut, but we're also expecting to see a reduction in the demand side of the economy. In other words, a much weaker economy than perhaps we had anticipated. So that's on one side. On the government side, sorry, any which way, oil prices go down. Nigeria's unsold cargoes went up at a point, but fortunately, they are now beginning to come down. At the height, the gap between Nigeria's production and export was about 200,000 barrels a day. Currently, the last set of figures I saw suggests that they published by the DPR, Department for Petroleum Resources, suggests that that gap has narrowed to about 70,000 barrels a day. But what all of that simply says is very simple. Any which way, the revenue side of the government is badly affected. So government revenues go down. And as we can see, the government has revised its budget, but that revision of the budget means that a lot more of borrowing has to happen. Currently, the budget faces, or Nigeria faces, a fiscal gap of about 5 trillion compared to about slightly over 2 trillion when the budget was originally proposed. Now, or was originally passed. Now we have had to borrow. We are borrowing both domestically and internationally in order to meet that gap. Well, whether we like it or not, as I had said earlier, we face a COVID-19 is also weakening our external account. It doesn't matter how you look at it. On the export side, oil prices had gone down, which means that we will see a reduction in our, we already had at the end of 2019, a weak external account because we were already running a deficit even on the current account. If you now combine with that a fall in capital importation, then you can begin to imagine just how badly things have been in terms of our. Now, in terms of financial markets, a couple of things are pretty clear now. To begin with, there is a major issue around FX. And if you look, the turnover in the investment and exporters window has gone down very, 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 very sharply. Essentially, this is the central bank trying to manage the resources that it has. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to raise some issues about that. Now, but one of the areas that I have been pleasantly surprised about is the way credit to the private sector seems to have been sustained. Now, where are we going from here? Because there are about 3 questions I will answer. Oh, sorry, 4 questions. So where did we start from? What is the outlook and what is going to drive the outlook? And then, what impact for businesses? Now, in terms of the outlook, the key driver, remember what I said earlier, global conditions affect Nigeria very significantly. So how does the pandemic itself, how does it evolve over the coming weeks, months, and quarters? As I said earlier, people are speaking of a second wave, and my own view is that we haven't even gotten over the first wave, and therefore it's not clear to me that it's a multiplicity of waves, but we'll have to wait and see. Currently, about 11 million infections, of which I think about 500,600,000 deaths globally, and yet, it's how this pandemic evolves. As far as oil is concerned, we are expecting to see an average second half of 2020 of of about $41 per barrel. Now, for us, as the global economy opens up, increasingly opens up, the demand for oil should improve, and therefore our FX positions should improve. Now, if we are looking on the domestic side, what's going to drive the outlook? It's a couple of things. Yeah, we've already spoken about oil prices. We've also spoken about, the drop in, the increase in borrowing. But I think a major dimension of the outlook will be policy reform. To what extent are we going to see a sustained attempt to deal with some of our underlying problems? We are also going to have to ask questions around, okay, we are seeing the consumer under pressure. Is there any way that the consumer's pressures can be relieved? We've already spoken about the external side and the global challenges that we all see. And then on the monetary side, there are issues around exchange rates. Unfortunately, I think some of these are now being dealt with. Now, in terms of the outlook, there were about 3, 4, perhaps even 5 potential scenarios in terms of our recovery. What the current numbers are suggesting is that in 2020, we will see a sharp decline. And bear in mind that the figure for Q1 2020 was a positive 1.87%. The figures for Q1 was a positive 1.87%. What was a positive 1.87%. If we are going to see a decline of the order that we are seeing, then the challenge is going to be that for the rest of the year, we should expect some fairly sharp reductions. But the nice thing, as I said, is it's likely to be, if these projections are correct, and I sincerely hope they are, it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, a sharp descent, but also a similarly sharp ascent. Because if you look at the gap between minus 5.4 and 2.6 that the IMF is projecting, then you're looking at growth in 2021 of about 7%, of actually almost 8% in 1 year. And so for me, like everyone else in the world, we are going to see a slowdown, but then we are expecting to see a fairly sharp recovery thereafter. Now, there are a couple of things that we have to bear in mind around the recovery. As I said earlier, how do we manage the pandemic? How do we deal with the consumer? And how do we create fiscal space? But for me, at the heart of recovery is going to be stimulating investment. How does Nigeria stimulate investment in our economy? The more we can persuade investable resources that Nigeria is a suitable destination, the better for us. Because before the pandemic, Nigeria's investment as a ratio of GDP was about 15%. We really need to find a way of taking that up to about 25% in order to stimulate growth and make it more rapid than population. Now, so for me, in terms of the policy dimension, it's a couple of things. Okay, we have to look at the policy around the health, the health side, but we also have to look at a policy regime that is concentrating on at least 2 major things. One, the kinds of reforms that help us resolve some of the issues that were outstanding, but a second, the kinds of policies that help us make more effective use of the resources that Nigeria has. And in my view, as we look, we are beginning to see that some of the key questions are actually now being resolved. Especially a major challenge for Nigeria has always been around the role of the price mechanism in resource allocation. And I've made this argument probably for about 3, 4 years or even longer now. One of the things we have seen, in fact, in the last few days, is the central bank's restating its commitment to a single exchange rate. And yesterday, I think it was, yesterday was Friday, the official, so before yesterday, there were 2 exchange rates, 360 for conversion of oil revenues into FAC, and 380 at the I&E window. Now, the central bank governor had made it very clear that they were going to harmonize exchange rates around the I&E window, and that has now been done. We also saw about 2 days or 3 days ago, certainly earlier this week, the PPRA, my apologies, PPRA announced an increase in oil prices, in fuel prices, essentially saying as global oil prices have risen, petrol prices have also risen.
Professor, sorry to interrupt you. Like there are some people, those are waiting. So I think the host by mistake has given you the full host. Can you make Mr. Praveen as co-host, or maybe pass on the host? Because there are many people are waiting on the queue.
Okay, what I will immediately do, let me first of all admit everybody who is waiting.
Thank you.
And then, so what next do I do?
Maybe if you can make Mr. Praveen as co-host.
I wonder how they do that. Let me see.
Sorry
Just
for the
in case
incorrect.
I get this wrong. So who did you say I should make co-host?
Mr. Praveen Kumar.
Sanjukt Bharatiya Association.
Sorry?
Yeah, Sanjukt Bharati Association.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can. So the association. Oh, no, sorry. I have Ramesh Biswal.
Yeah, you can,
you can
do that. You can do that, sir.
Okay. Now, there is a good chance that this might eject me because I suspect I've done it the wrong way. Oh, okay. Has he got it now?
Let me check.
Yes. No.
He hasn't?
No. So, sir, just in the right side, there is a more option.
Yes.
Just click on more option and make co-host.
What I see under more option is stop live stream.
No, don't stop. Don't stop, sir.
Exactly. Okay.
Anything?
Sir, please continue. Please continue, sir. All
right.
have been now.
Forgive me. I'm sorry about this.
No, our apology, sir. Our apology for inconvenience to everybody. Sorry, sir.
Right. So I will again share back my screen.
I'll request Elan to mute the microphone. Elan, somebody's there.
Right. So as I was saying, that one of the things we are seeing, and we have seen in the past 1 week is in particular, is that Nigeria is beginning to come around to policy reform. As I said, only yesterday, the FX rates were harmonized, and the central bank has made consistently, it known that it was working in that direction. Also, fuel subsidies under recovery has been eliminated. Indeed, some of us were quite worried when PPRA was announcing prices that it was good enough when crude oil prices were falling that they could announce reduction in fuel prices. And some wondered whether when crude oil prices rose, PPRA would be in the same position to do that, because rising fuel prices is not politically popular in any country. But fortunately, we saw last week that PPRA has advised an increase in prices of petrol. We have also seen, even though it is, again, you can understand some of the reaction to it, we are also seeing the attempt by the government to change electricity prices. You know, the government is trying to, there is, under the MITO, there is the multi-year tariff order means that electricity prices are to go up. Now, there was supposed to be an increase, I think, on the 1st of July. There is a bit of a conversation around it, but my sense is that at the end of the day, we will all come back to resolving, some of the issues. Once we can resolve those issues. So for me, we are beginning to see an improvement in terms of trying to deal with our fundamental issues. Now, in terms of the implications, Let me deal with it in the following way. Remember I said earlier that there are 4 dimensions to any economy. It doesn't matter how sophisticated the economy is. There are households, there are firms, there is government, and there are markets. With regard to the government, I think there are probably 2 key things therein. The first has to do with what is the government's response to economic implications of COVID-19. And therein, again, we have seen Nigeria put in place an economic sustainability plan. And the impact or the intent of that plan is to do at least 2 things, at least. One is to reduce the duration of any slowdown, but 2 is also to reduce any adverse impact. And to that extent, Nigeria is prioritizing food security. Nigeria is prioritizing resolving some of the issues around pricing and resource allocation. Nigeria is placing attention on, affordable housing. And so we are beginning to see that there is a plan that Nigeria is putting in place. The plan is supposed to last the next 12 months. And one of the things that the planners are working towards is that whatever is not achieved in 12 months can be rolled into the successor to the ERGP. So that's the first thing as far as the government is concerned. And as I said earlier, we are now seeing a concerted attempt across a series of policy buckets to try and deal with some of our previous outstanding issues. The second issue as far as the government is concerned, of course, is so how do we fund all of this? Unfortunately, the government, even though our debt service to income ratios are pretty high, but whether we like it or not, at the moment, we are obliged to borrow. But what would be more interesting as the economic sustainability plan is implemented is to ensure that it can pull in a lot of private sector investment to drive the Nigerian economy. In the presence of a narrow fiscal space, we need investments, in order to come in. And so that for me is where the reform process should be leading towards in order to give us some space. The sector that I think would be most adversely affected by COVID-19 is the household sector. In other words, the companies that you ladies and gentlemen run, you will have to think very, very carefully and very, very seriously about how do you deal with your consumers. Before COVID-19, we had already seen consumers under pressure. And that pressure had meant that consumers were downtrading. In other words, they were moving from premium brands to value brands. We were seeing corporate responses in terms of pack resizing. So companies were coming up with smaller pack sizes. In economics, we tend to talk about that and say, well, they were simply breaking bulk so that you can make the same purchase over a series of purchases, the same size of eventual purchase in small bite sizes. And I think that's going to be one of the key areas that your companies are going to have to start thinking about. And in order to be able to do that, there is now a greater need for market intimacy. You need to have a clearer understanding of the dynamics of what is driving households in their demand, preferences, and choices, in the choices that they make. It's no longer going to be good enough to say, to work by instinct. We are now going to have to be more objective, more data-driven in trying to understand almost on a real-time basis what are the emerging trends in the marketplace. Because failure to understand these emerging trends really would create significant difficulty for companies. Beyond that, I will come back to some of these sector issues. So for me, the households are really going to be where all of us are going to have to focus attention. As far as individual firms or firms as a collective are concerned, well, I think there is now even though we've all not been here before and we're all seeing things unfold, but I think it's increasingly clear that a number of things, that it's unlikely that we will go back fully to where we started from as far as companies are concerned. To begin with, if we have to live with COVID-19, then the issues around social distancing and how we deal with infectious diseases must now move from the government into the corporate. Because when we talk about community spread of COVID-19, we are now increasingly being told that as countries are unlocking their economies, then the spread in workplace environment, doesn't matter whether it's commercial or industrial or whatever it is becoming more and more important. And so we're going to have to figure that out. We're also going to have to begin to figure out what's the role, what does the new normal look like? And one thing is pretty clear, that the new normal has technology as a major enabler. Today, we have currently the best part of 100 people on this call. If we had to hold this in the previous environment, we would not be thinking of a Zoom call. We would all be gathering perhaps at the Indian High Commission or wherever is chosen in order to have this session. But today, technology means that the way we interact with one another is changing. The extent of close-knit interaction is changing. The dynamics of it are changing. And it is unlikely that that change is going to slow down anytime soon. Remember the point I made right at the outset, that countries are also looking at the extent to which basic needs are domestically manufactured, domestically produced. And so I would expect, and we have already seen in Nigeria, the central bank, for example, announcing a fund to support the pharmaceutical industry to enable them produce some of the basic stuff that Nigeria and Nigerians certainly need. It's going to be very important also that the areas of food security, and I can say one thing without any fear of contradiction here, that in terms of food security, in my view, one area where there's a massive opportunity now is the area of reducing post-harvest losses. Currently, Nigeria has post-harvest losses of between 40 and 60%, depending on crop and depending on geographical area. And from what I am told, that 40 to 60% post-harvest loss amounts to the better part of, I think it's 9 million acres of, it's either 9 million acres or 9 million hectares of cultivation every year. Now, you can imagine that if post-harvest losses are reduced, the supply of products of food increases, prices come down, it provides for a more stable environment. In my view, this is going to be one of the biggest areas of opportunity going forward. But I just thought, let's take a look at the 6 biggest sectors of the economy that account for 75%. So as I said earlier, food security will remain important. And for me, it's the curtailment of post-harvest losses. Where there is a challenge is going to be on the distribution side, because as I'm sure you know, for those of you who have to move your goods up and down the country, the lockdown has meant that transport arrangements, logistics arrangements have become more difficult. No matter what the role that technology plays in connecting you to your consumer, the delivery of what the consumer has bought still depends on a physical logistics operation. And to that, indeed, I was trying to send a package from Lagos to Kaduna State. Now, ordinarily, it should take about 3 days in the pre-COVID situation. I was told yesterday that the earliest they can see it being delivered is 2 weeks from now. And I was like, what? But then immediately I could understand. The lockdown as we try to contain COVID-19 has meant aviation has suffered severely. Transportation generally has suffered. But as these open up, then hopefully we begin to see. So in the short term, certainly we see the challenges here. But in terms of distribution generally, my sense is technology means that we should see new dynamics forming. Technology and telecoms, as I've said, is is one of the obvious sectors that will benefit from where we go from here. But the big challenge is going to be how quickly can ICT infrastructure be deployed and continue to be maintained to keep to keep things moving. Manufacturing, again, there have been disruptions to supply chains. But again, as the world reopens its economy, we would expect to see some of these these disruptions go away. Where there is, without doubt in my mind, going to be continuing difficulty is simply in the real estate sector, simply because even pre-COVID, it had a problem anyway. So as far as businesses are concerned, there are a couple of things: competitiveness, innovation, consolidation. Self-reliance is going to be a very, very important dimension. But also, in my view, one of the important elements is actually going to be external opportunities. Indeed, even though I said earlier that, countries are going to try to maintain at least to ensure that some of their basic production don't leave them vulnerable in the event of a future eventuality like this. But I'm still clear in my mind that international collaboration, international opportunities are still going to be at the heart of what happens going forward. And beyond that, if you're unable to manage your efficiencies and your costs, then you really will be in serious trouble. Really will be in serious trouble. Because as I said, those who are buying are now going to be ever more cost conscious. And if you're going to see your market or retain your market share, then your companies are going to have to drive efficiencies very, very sharply. Indeed, one of the things that I have always identified and emphasized when I've spoken to the IPF and its members in the past is that companies have to look at inflation from a very different dimension. Most of the time, we tend to think about inflation as simply the rise in the cost of goods and services. Absolutely, that's correct. However, from a corporate perspective, inflation has to be regarded as the amount of pressure you must put on your own costs in order to remain competitive, in order not to have to increase prices, especially at a time like this when your consumers are vulnerable. And as I had said earlier, it's going to be an imperative. You cannot do without this. On a better understanding of your consumers, how COVID, how their pattern of behavior evolves as a result of COVID-19. So ladies and your excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, these are my own thoughts. Let me summarize them as follows. COVID-19 started as a health crisis, has morphed into an economic, humanitarian, and potentially a security crisis. For countries like ours, every country around the world, the IMF and the World Bank now projects that there is going to be a recession, a global recession. The good thing is that what the IMF and the World Bank and others see is a V-shaped recession. In other words, sharp in, but also sharp out. Beyond that, for countries like ours, we have a more limited space, a more limited fiscal space within which to operate. And that, in my view, is going to stimulate policy reforms in the direction of improving investment attractiveness of Nigeria. That, in my view, will further open up this economy to more sustainable and higher level growth. As I said earlier, what happens in the rest of the world affects us. So the sooner the world opens up its economy and unemployment comes down as economies recover, we will have the benefit of recovering diaspora transfers, we will have the benefit of recovering oil prices, and so it will begin and continue to improve our economic dimensions. As I said, don't forget, going forward, we are already seeing policy reforms. We hope that those reforms will be accelerated in order to give us higher levels of growth. And as I showed, just a moment or two earlier, when When I said, as far as companies are concerned, certainly there are certain sectors that I have discussed, but competitiveness, in other words, being innovative, and there's going to be sector consolidation in many areas. How innovative are we to take advantage of this? There's going to be a greater conversation around self-reliance, especially at very basic levels. But notwithstanding that conversation around self-reliance, I still think that opportunities, external opportunities, especially for the efficient and innovative companies outside of Nigeria, will remain. So, Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, these are my thoughts. If there are any questions or comments, I am happy to deal with them.
Excellent. Excellent, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Salami. I'll request everybody to...
Prof, I have one question to you.
Yeah, sir, can you post it in the group, sir?
Let me quickly ask, because I have to leave fine, because I have an emergency call.
Sir. Okay, sir.
Professor Doin Salami, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. My question is related to one of your slides, which shows which are the sectors, which are the losers and which are the gainers, who lose and who gains. Honorable, as you know, that one of the sector where Indian High Commission is also involved in assisting the Nigerians, thousands of Nigerians, every month they used to travel to India for various critical or tertiary surgeries. Medical tourism or business of hospital industry is one of the largest gainers in India, and a lot of Nigerians were traveling to India for medical treatment and surgery. Now, in last 4 months, that healthcare travel or medical issues related travel has completely stopped. So one of the sector, which is the healthcare sector, will be one of the gainers within inward Nigeria. What is your thoughts on that? What are your comments on that? How can Nigeria develop that? Because now Nigerians have to look inward, because most of the Nigerians, those who used to travel to UK, USA or India, they are not able to travel for their surgeries. So what are your thoughts on that, sir?
All right. Well, there's absolutely no doubt that healthcare, forgive me, there are 46 sectors in the Nigerian economy, and I simply chose to concentrate on the top 6 because that is 75% of the economy. But I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that healthcare will be one of the key sectors that will benefit from the impact of COVID-19. Indeed, we're already seeing it. If you think about it, immediately the pandemic became a real source of concern in Nigeria. The private sector mobilized, I would almost say in an unprecedented way, resources to build isolation centers to improve healthcare facilities. Now, there's no way you look at it that, okay, so we have seen what can be done. Now, the key question then becomes, how do we build on this? The one thing to please also bear in mind is that I imagine that as soon as international air travel is safely restored, you will still see what you have described as medical tourism. And the reason is not very difficult. There's a lead and a lag between you deciding, okay, we now need to upgrade these facilities. Many of what we need to upgrade the facilities, we don't produce in Nigeria. And so we are going to have to import them. And so in the meantime, you will still see travel abroad in order to meet medical requirements. But I am clear in my mind that there was already something driving healthcare, by the way, even before COVID. The introduction of health insurance was already creating a buzz as far as healthcare is concerned. Because rather than people spending out of pocket, medical insurance was kicking in. And so what I would expect to see in the periods ahead is a strengthening of the medical insurance arrangements. And I'm hopeful that we can even widen it to enable universal access to healthcare. And so any which way you look at it, I think the fact that we've all had to be locked in with very few having the opportunity to travel has concentrated the minds on the imperative of a good, sustainable, functioning healthcare sector. And so I absolutely have no doubt that that is a sector which will improve as time goes by.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Salami, for very informative and enlightenment speech. It is always great to hear you, sir. There is always new things to learn from on any of your speeches we have witnessed so far, even during classes, which also always help us to manage our business better. Thank you for your input on the new normal, particularly reducing post-harvest losses, and also how the business need to be competitive, innovation, and consolidations, and also how we can correct the housekeeping issues by increasing efficiency and cost management is going to be the key. I'll thank you so much, sir. I request all our members and the audience to put the question on the chat window. There are two type of questions I'm getting, like one, there are wonderful work done by Indian High Commission for the Vande Bharat mission under the leadership of our Indian High Commissioner, Sri Abhay Thakurji. We appreciate. There are some questions coming in personal window, but I'll request first our audience to start the questions on to Dr. Salami. And later on, if our Honorable High Commissioner is available for any questions, we'll ask that. To start with, I'll request Dr. Salami to answer one question from Mr. Jeevan Nakum, who is asking, the question is, what is the present status of Dangote Petrochemical Refinery, and what will be the impact to Nigeria import and plastic industries?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Dangote petrochemical refinery, but I understand that it is making progress towards its completion. How soon that will be, we'll all have to wait and see. Now, in terms of its impact on Nigeria's imports and plastics industry, now I assume when the questioner says import, I assume fuel imports. Don't forget that the Dangote refinery is located in an export, in a free trade zone. And so I imagine that its market is both local and global. And my sense then would be that for as long as Nigeria's domestic markets provide a decent opportunity, they will enable us reduce the amount of imports. But one thing that is already very clear from what I have read, and let me emphasize this, I am not an expert on the Dangote refineries, but my understanding is that the configuration of the Dangote refineries means that the sulfur content, and therefore the sulfur content of fuel into Nigeria, will be much, much, much lower. And more in line with the best international standards. And so if nothing else, it certainly would have an impact in reducing the extent of acid rain. So in other words, where there are economic advantages, but there are also, and very especially, environmental advantages that Nigeria can gain. As far as the plastics industry is concerned, of course, it simply means that there will be raw material inputs that the plastics industry can help grow the plastics industry in a more sustained and sustainable way.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Dhirendra Chauhan. The question is, why too much post-harvest losses, and what are the root cause of cause in Nigeria? And okay, sorry, I think
this is not my question. Sorry.
Yeah. So in view on the China's growing investment in strategic infrastructure and just like in AKK gas pipeline project, and also the natural gas prices like at the $8 for MSCF with forex of 361 is one of the highest globally. Nigeria has huge gas reserves, still domestic market is starving. Any plan for gas price review? Why too much post-harvest loss? what
All
are
right.
the lost root cause?
Now let me do. So you have posed 3 questions. Remember, a significant element of my discussion this evening has been on the imperative of investment, and therefore, when I'm asked China's growing investment in strategic infrastructure, the AKK gas pipeline, for me, Nigeria welcomes any investment. But increasingly, Nigeria requires non-debt investment resources. And so to the extent that it doesn't matter where it comes from, what we need is investment that helps to grow and diversify our economy. And the gas pipeline also, ties to the last question you asked, because anybody who has looked recently, the Minister of State for Petroleum has made very clear that the next set of key movements in policy terms is in terms of the development of Nigeria's gas resources. And so when the questioner asks, oh, the pricing is currently unattractive, my sense is I can't answer directly for the Minister of State, and let me also quickly make this possible. I hope I made it clear at the outset. I don't speak for the government. I'm an advisor, but I don't speak for the government. But I am clear that given the imperatives of gas development, and the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources has been very clear about gas being the next big thing that Nigeria must work on, then my sense is that they will create conditions that make investment in the gas industry attractive. Now, your first question was about post-harvest losses. With regard to post-harvest losses, well, they arise from a whole series of things. To begin with, the farm to market routes, the farm to market connections need to be better strengthened. And don't forget, so there is evacuation from farms ahead of storage. Now, in both, so evacuation is about making sure that rural roads, for example, are able to facilitate quick, efficient evacuation of produce into either storage or into market. So, and as we all know, road networks are being improved. And so as that improvement builds, then the better. The second is around storage. And we need, and which is why I said, look, anybody who has an interest in innovative storage technologies and storage will certainly see a market in Nigeria. Simply because if, as I said earlier, in some crops, as high as 60% of production is actually lost before it can get to the market, then we really, really would have a problem. So for me, it's around the challenges of evacuation, the challenges of storage. And indeed also, even before, indeed in the production, in the cultivation, Nigeria also needs to be more efficient. I remember, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was listening to the then Honorable Minister of Agriculture, and he was saying on the occasion when I listened to him, that Nigeria's maize harvests were about 10% of what they could be. And part of that simply arises because our agricultural practices were not as efficient as they could be. Indeed, the example he gave was comparing us to Spain, if I remember correctly, and that the gap between corn rows was one of the key reasons why we could not match the production numbers that he had observed in Spain. So for me, our post-harvest losses stem from a series of things, not least the kinds of storage capacities and technologies, not least the evacuation challenges, but also not least because of the production challenges that we also face. By the way, may I say this now? In about 15 minutes, I need to switch to a call. So forgive me, but so you need to hasten this up a bit.
Sure, sure. Thank you, sir. The next question is like, Mr. Ravi you spoke about the need of Nigeria to attract private sector investment. Please, can you highlight what plans are being put in place to attract investment?
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, Ravi, it's good to see, it's good to hear from you again. We've been we've been friends and discussed some of these issues before now. We have to do policy reforms. Now, and as I said earlier in my discussion, some of these policy reforms have started. They need perhaps to go faster or even broader, but certainly these policy reforms have started. Remember the point I made, that our policy reforms, as far as the economy is concerned, must deal with pricing issues. How do we use the price mechanism as a means of allocating resources? That for me is a major point at the heart of any reform. And one of the things that we are seeing, and I gave 3 examples earlier. First, I drew attention to the fact that, unlike what we thought, PPRA, even though it announces prices, we have seen prices go down, but we have also seen them go up, which suggests that the days when we burnt money on oil, on fuel subsidies are behind us. So that's number one. Number two, the central bank yesterday, moved on the currency into what's the right word? Into consolidating into a single market. And this had been preceded by a series of statements, not least by the governor of the central bank, assuring that Nigeria would move to a single exchange rate with consolidation around the NAFEX rates. And so what we have seen yesterday is essentially the realization of that. A third example that I gave earlier was the example around electricity prices. As I said, a further increase in electricity prices had been due to take effect, I think, on the 1st of July. There are still some conversations around it, but my sense is eventually that will take place, because we are increasingly understanding that in the absence of these prices, price-driven efficiencies in resource allocation, then the economy will not grow, simply because investors will be less interested in investing in the Nigerian economy. So for me, I think we are now seeing a movement in the direction of reform. We would hope that, as time goes by, that movement becomes much faster.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Deepak Kalita, Mr. Anantarao, Mr. MK. The question is, through COVID has given a lot of setbacks on the economy. At the same time, it has also given opportunity to many. My question is the government thinking of industrializing Nigeria to produce goods, not only for the country, but for export to other countries, as local sourcing is cheaper because of simplification of the value chain, and also, most importantly, it will create jobs. The second question is, what is CBN doing to bring dollar inflow from foreign investors? Can we see further devaluation shortly? The third question is, what will be your recommendation to banks to lend to key SME sectors in the adverse credit environment?
All right. So you raised 3 questions, and I have absolutely no doubt that Nigeria is interested and will move towards industrialization. Look, there is no way that this economy grows sustainably at a rate faster than population growth if we don't improve our industrial production capacity. Don't forget, at the beginning of in the course of my discussion, I had made the point that currently investment to GDP ratio is somewhere around about 15%, and that Nigeria needs to take that to somewhere around about 25, 30, 33% in order to stimulate and release the energies of this economy. And so for me, again, many people don't know this, But Nigeria actually has an industrial revolution plan. And so one of the things that we are seeing is that as a successor document to the ERGP is being produced, all of these are being revived. And so whether we like it or not, we have no choice other than to head in the direction of industrial growth. And indeed, part of the movement and the concern around the power sector is that a country cannot grow industrially by depending on private generators as the means of fuel for industrial, for industrialization. And so for me, some of what I am seeing, movement in the power sector, movement on FX, movement on subsidy in fuel, kind of speak to some of the things we need to see in order to see Nigeria grow her industrial base. Now, as far as are we going to see a further devaluation? I'm afraid I cannot speak for the central bank. We will all, like you and I have international obligations that I have to settle. And so, like everybody, we will have to wait and see what it is exactly that, but I am doubtlessly clear in my mind that the fact of a single exchange rate moves the conversation forward. I, in my days when I was on the Monetary Policy Committee, always made my own position very clear that it would be useful to see a market reflective exchange rate, to see a single exchange rate, to see the absence of multi-currency practices. And I think the central bank has most certainly moved in that direction in recent, in the recent period. Many months ago, we had multiple exchange rates. As of the close of business yesterday, there was only one exchange rate, the I&E window. And so for me, I think these kinds of movements improve the chances of foreign inflows that can help grow the economy. Now, you then asked a third question, and I'm trying to find what it is.
Yeah, what will be your recommendation to banks to land to key SME sector?
Yeah, well, every country understands the role of SME. The last set of data that was published by the National Bureau of Statistics suggests that there are about 42 million SMEs in Nigeria. Now, one of the big challenges that we have as a country, and indeed it's not even peculiar to Nigeria, one of the big challenges that SMEs globally tend to face is upward concentration of credit around the world. In other words, banks, financial institutions have tended to prefer bigger corporates that have the capacity, verifiable capacity, either to pledge assets in support of lending or whose activities can be monitored. Now, for Nigeria, that has, I don't think, been any different. But we have also seen recent, at least in the last couple of years, some movement. The movable assets law that allows movable assets to be deployed as collateral, the establishment of credit registries. Now, all of these are, moving in the direction of reducing the risks that are attached to SMEs. But let me make one point very, very clear. Many years ago, I spent a whole period of time working with UNIDO, which is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, on SME finance in Nigeria. And one of the key things that I discovered at that time, and I'm not sure that it has significantly changed now, is that a lot of SMEs, finance is actually not their problem. Oh yes, they tell us that finance is their problem. But a lot of SMEs actually need better capacity for managerial decision-making, have a need for better understanding of the markets in which they operate. Because in a lot of cases, if you put money in, that money will not come back simply because of the fundamental structural managerial weaknesses that are inherent in many of these SME firms. And so I would be one of those certainly advocating for an improvement in SME managerial capacity, both in terms of how they approach their markets, in terms of their capacity for opportunities identification, and also in terms of general structuring that reduces the risks that are around them.
Thank you, sir. I think whenever you come to for the discussion, like people won't let you go without giving a prediction on your exchange rates. So there are some couple of questions on the exchange rates prediction
Well,
for
let me
coming
quickly
month
tell you
and
that
6
so
months.
that you don't waste your time. As an economist, you are taught two things at the beginning of your studies. That forecasting is one of the most fraught elements of economics. I am an empirical economist. I have spent 30 years. I graduated PhD in 1989. And my PhD involved building a model of the Nigerian economy that I used in studying inflation. So I very well understand the empirics that underlie forecasting. But you're taught very quickly in economics in graduate school, forecasting exchange rates and forecasting the price of oil is asking for trouble. And so for me, I don't bother forecasting either. You will see that in my presentation, my reference to oil price is based on NYMEX, the futures market. So if anybody wants to have a fair idea what exchange rates may well be, there are futures markets that are now available for the exchange rate as far as Nigeria is concerned, whether it is the FMDQ or whether it is the non-derivable forwards traded out of London. The data for this is very easily available, very widely available. So anybody who's looking for an exchange rate forecast should, and by the way, and I'm not saying this facetiously, these markets have real monies being traded. And so if those who are trading money, if you cannot bet on their understanding, why do you want to bet on the understanding of a poor university academic who is trying to run a consulting firm?
Thank you, sir. I think Mr. Subramaniam and Mr. Dinesh Rathi wanted to ask a question.
Dinesh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening,
Hi,
sir.
sir. How are you?
Yeah.
Just cool.
Dr. Salami, good evening.
Good evening.
I have an important questions. In one of the webinar what I attended, I saw that they told that real GDP percentage was negative in 2016 by minus 1.58%. We know that 2016 was a tough year for all of us. And what I would like to learn from you that what it is likely to be in 2020 and how it will impact employment, food security, and availability of Forex.
All right. Well, I already dealt with that in my discussion earlier. And if I can find, anyway, you'll get the deck sent to you. But the forecasts as of now show that suggest that in 2020, GDP will drop. GDP growth will be negative. And the figures range between about 3.5% and 5.5%. However, these same forecasters suggest that the contraction in the economy will only be very brief. In other words, we will be back to growth in 2021. Indeed, the IMF is forecasting that growth on the Nigerian economy in 2021 will be approximately 2.6%. And so, which is why I said earlier, it's a V-shaped curve for growth, sharp down, but also very sharp back up. So as far as your questions on food security and FX are concerned, I already drew attention. If you look at food security, Nigeria's economic sustainability plan directly addresses that. It proposes to deal with post-harvest losses and also an increase in food cultivation, in bringing land under cultivation. So I think for as long as we are able to ensure that this current planting season is not lost or too adversely affected, then I think we should reasonably be good. And as for your question around FX, well, if you look at the numbers currently, our FX reserves are actually rising. Now, we all understand that, okay, the inflows from Nigeria's external borrowing are boosting the reserves. But don't forget my point earlier, that Nigeria needs to stimulate investment, non-debt investment into the Nigerian economy. The more we're able to do that, the more our GDP, the more our forex base remains solid. Let me give you an example. Nigeria's infrastructure master plan requires us to spend about $100 billion every year for 3 decades, 30 years, 3 decades. In other words, roughly $3 trillion over 30 years. Imagine $100 billion, which would be spent on roads, on rail, on power, a whole host of things. Imagine if Nigeria were able to attract foreign direct investment into these infrastructure areas of the order of, say, 20, 25, $30 billion or even higher. That immediately changes the whole complex of how we think about foreign currency and reserves. And so for me, the key thing is that Nigeria must face up to is, what do we do now that enables us build trust, build investor confidence in Nigeria as a means of attracting investment. Again, and I've said this about 2 or 3 times already today, Nigeria needs to see investment to GDP come to, grow from 15% currently to a level not less than 25% of GDP, but preferably as high as 33% of GDP. Dinesh, you are going to have the dubious pleasure of asking me the last question, because I have a conference call that I must take in about 10 minutes. So I will have to depart from this call after your question.
Thank you, Dr. Salami. I mean, wonderful presentation as usual. Just a quick one. The whole unification of exchange rate, which has been kind of been in the news for some time, and CBN and Ministry of Finance has been working towards that. Now, yesterday there was an announcement of SMEIS window being aligned to the IND window, which is to make it kind of 380 and more gravitate towards 385. So will the official exchange rate, which I see on the CBN website appearing as 360, that will also change, once the harmonization is complete, or that will still remain at 360 and all the other rates will be at 385, 386? What's your view?
My understanding is that the rate of 360 will move to 380. You see, the central bank has been very clear, and let us, we like to complain a lot. This is not going well, that is not going well. But the central bank has, in recent weeks, made clear its determination to achieve a single exchange rate around the NAFEX, which is essentially the the investment and export window. And so what you saw yesterday of a movement from the official exchange rate at 360 to 380, okay, so we'll now have to wait until the first working day after the announcement, which will be on Monday, and see what the new rates are reflected on the central bank's website. The central bank is, been, at least in recent times, been very consistent about the need for a unified exchange rate. I'm sure you and I have had various conversations around exchange rates and what mightn't happen and all of that. And so for me, I'm one of those who say, look, we have to understand what has been done, and as part of a movement in a particular direction. And let us hope that nothing happens that derails that movement.
Yeah, because it has got two impacts, for operators, especially manufacturing companies. One is, it impacts the custom duty rates as well. So yes, the translation of the custom duty amount happen at that official exchange rate, and the other is the gas prices. So those two then also go up by about 6 to 7% compared to the current levels.
Yes. See, the irony, well, it's not an irony. The fact of life is, as they say, making omelets without breaking eggs becomes very difficult. On the one hand, we say, if investors are to bring monies into Nigeria, they must be able to have clarity about how pricing, not just exchange rates, interest rates, inflation, a whole raft of prices are going to be determined. Why senior executives like yourselves, Dinesh, are paid very fat salaries is for you to manage the risks that arise from some of these things. for as long as we create uncertainty by having a multiplicity of rates, then executives like yourself will view Nigeria less favorably than other markets where you have clarity. You see, it's not about price movements up and down. That's taken as a fact of life. It's the extent to which we are familiar with what the drivers of those movements are, of which we have control over hedging those movements. Now, to the extent that that is available, people like me would not worry about executives like you. We would simply leave to find suitable hedges, provided that Nigeria remains globally competitive. That should be the direction in which our economy has to move.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think you are rushing to another.
Permit me, my dear moderator, permit me to take my leave of His Excellency, the Ambassador, Their Excellencies, the Ambassador and the Deputy Ambassador excuse me, at the Indian High Commission. Also to all members who are present here. Unfortunately, I have a call that has actually now started. And so I have to crave your indulgence that I take my leave. So thank you all for what has been a very enjoyable evening for me. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Doyin Salami. Thank you very much,
Your Excellency, I will live up to my promise to call on you as soon as possible. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Salami. On behalf of Sabha, we extend our thanks, appreciations, and gratitude for attending the whole Indian community, and we are really grateful to you. Thank you, Doctor.
A pleasure. Good night, sir.
Good night, sir. Thank you so much. Now I'll request Mr. Ramesh Vishalji for giving a Sabha update, COVID update, the isolation treating centers and treatment center status, and update on next webinars.
Good evening, all. I hope all of us have enjoyed the Dr. Salami's economic informations and also what is the outlooks. Really, it was nice, and I have really enjoyed. I hope everybody has enjoyed. So once again, good evening to all. Let me update Sabha's initiatives of Isolation Cum Treatment Center COVID Type 2 with Association of Indo Eye Care Foundations, and with the full undivided and unconditional support of all the Indian communities and all corporate houses. So that isolation center is really ready as of today's date in all respects, and it is waiting for handover to the Ministry of Health and Lagos State Government and NCDC. As per updates from the NCDC and Ministry of Health as of yesterday evening, they have informed us they have put all the internal checkings, internal arrangements as a complete in all respects. Doctors and work nurses and paramedical forces are ready to be placed in the hospitals, and they are anticipating the dates with complete due diligence and due verifications. It will be put up in place before close of coming Wednesday, which is 7th of July. And by that date, the hospital will be operational as per the Ministry of Health's data, what has been given by yesterday. So this is the updates we have. So from our side, we have complete in all respects. We are waiting for the government to take over the things so that the Indian community's dream project of handing over a hospital for the treatment of Nigerian community is going to come very shortly, within a couple of days. So this is the information I wanted to share from the on behalf of Sabha. So this is the one. This is one commitment of Sabha and initiatives of Sabha. Second one, I wanted to inform you all. We have completed today the 12th webinar. And this is our People's Awareness webinar, which is going to come up another 2 webinars we have planned for. 13th webinar is going to come, is a very renowned person who is Sonam Wangchuk. Is related to the Three Idiot movie. He is going to come on 12th of July at 11:30 a.m. So I'll request everybody to join this webinars. We'll have the YouTube link and also the Zoom link. So everybody requested to join. Then the 14th webinar we'll have with one of the author and educators and also one of the management guru, that is Mr. Sivkhera from India. He is going to come also on 19th July, Sunday at 3:30 p.m. So being Sunday, so I request everybody to join. We will also circulate the webinar papers to everybody. So with this, Sabha like to thank every Indian community members and all associations and Indian High Commissions for joining these meetings. And really, we are grateful to everybody. Now I'll request Praveen ji to take up the vote of thanks so that we can close the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Biswal. I think in the meantime, if High Commission want to answer the question, there is a question regarding when the travel and visa will resume. Somebody has asked if Indian High Commissioner wanted to.
Yeah, please.
Is it mute or is it on?
It's okay, sir. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, about resumption of travel, right now, as you know, India is still not open for international travel at present. But as you all have seen, we have had a successful slew of Vande Bharat flights happening recently, and Airways also has been periodically carrying passengers from Nigeria to India and vice versa. And as regards starting of visas, well, that has to be a decision, taken globally by the government of India. And I'm sure they're very aware of the concerns of various travelers, especially from Nigeria. And as Chief Grover has also just raised the issue of medical tourism.
Yeah.
And a lot of anxiety from Nigerians are looking to India for treatment. So government of India is well aware of these concerns, and I'm sure there will be some provision for at least those urgent cases quite soon. And we will definitely update the Indian community on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. There is another question, sir. What is the procedure for Indian SARPEC holder returning to Nigeria?
Well, basically, I think this procedure is being taken care of by the Nigerian High Commission in New Delhi. We have seen them, bring in a lot of Indians, on the way back. And I think Chief Grover also has been able to get some people, some experts, medical experts back. So I think the Nigerian High Commission in New Delhi would be able to guide you better, because they are the ones who are supposed to make the official request to the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, and our External Affairs Ministry will definitely respond positively to such requests.
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. We really commend your efforts and help to all Indians, those who are here, particularly for Vande Bharat flights, and many Indians are going during the needy time. Thank you so much. I really apologize to all the audience, those who put questions, and because of time constraint, we couldn't ask to the guest speaker. So, but we tried a lot to ask as many questions as we could. Thank you so much for joining today's meeting. And I request our Sabha coordinator, Mr. Praveen Kumar, to give official vote of thanks.
Thank you, Anandji. Good evening, all again. All protocol observed for the vote of thanks. On behalf of Sabha, I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. Let me first of all start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making our all webinar a resounding success. First and foremost, I thank our Honorable High Commissioner of India, His Excellency, Shri Abhay Thakurji, and Deputy Commissioner Sri Surendranji, along with all officials in Abuja as well as Lagos, who despite his busy schedule has found time to grace this occasion. And I express our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Adedoyin Salami for his valuable and vulnerable insight on the topic COVID-19 and its impact on the Nigerian economy, emerging imperatives for business. His word of encouragement, his able guidance, and his valuable lesson always increasing our professional life. We are grateful to ICA, IPF, IWA presidents and its members, our mentors, our working committee members, all Samajam and Indian origin organization presidents for their presence. Last but not the least, I thank all the distinguished participants present here, all corporate houses accepting our invitation. I also thank Mr. Anand Sabat for conducting nicely as moderator of this. Finally, thank you so much, sir. See you soon in the next webinar we have planned for 12th July and 19th July. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Namaskar. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Stay safe. Good night.
Thank you, Rameshji, Anandji, and Praveenji. Bye.
Good night, Praveen. Good night.
Good night, sir. Good night.
So Praveen, good night. Anandji, Rameshji, everybody. Mustafaji, bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
A very informative and great webinar organized. Keep up good things about Team Sabha.
Yes,
Well
keep
done.
up the good things, Sabha. We are grateful to you and thankful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful
the
session.
next webinar where the Fungsuk Wangdu from the Three Idiots.
Thank you, Ji. All of you, bye. Rameshji, excellent.
Excellent, excellent.
And the next one.
Thank you, everyone. It was a wonderful session.
Jasenderji, bye.
Thank you, Praveenji. Thanks a
Hi,
lot.
Sachin.
Hi, Praveen.
Thank you,
Hi,
sir.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So our YouTube is also working well, and 40 people are watching the our webinar through the YouTube. So YouTube link is successful. Next, we are trying to link with the Facebook.
No.
So when we have a webinar, our link is on the YouTube and Facebook also. So people can enjoy on the every social media after this webinar. Next webinar, everything will be connected with the social media.
Yes, sir. You can now off the recording part because it is live is going. So you have to off it.